Hey everyone, it's Chris, and welcome back to another episode of the Weekly Coder. This week we are going to continue on with our C# 101 tutorials, and we're going to cover some conditional logic here, and the ones that we're going to go over are if, else, and else if. Okay, so last time we learned about classes and variables. In this tutorial we are going to put those classes and variables to use in what are known as conditional logic statements in C# and pretty much any other programming language. So if you know how to create if, else, and else if statements inside of C#, then you can also apply those to pretty much any other programming language. Although the syntax may be a little different, the principle is still the same. Okay, so we're going to do this in Unity. And I've already launched Unity, and I've chosen a location for my project. I've named it C# 101, if, else, if. And we're just going to click on Create Project, which will create a folder where I've told it to on my desktop. And it'll go ahead and launch the Unity editor for me. We're going to skip the new version for now. Alright, so let's make this a little bigger. So just as before, I'm not going to go over really how to create a script, how to attach it to something. I'm just going to fly through this really quickly so that we can go ahead and have our script ready and so that we can work on it. So I'm just going to go in here, I'm going to go create C# script. We'll name this one conditional, and I'm just going to attach it to the main camera so I don't have to add any other game objects into my hierarchy. So right now what we have is when we double click on this, it should launch MonoDevelop or whatever other IDE you have associated for editing your scripts in Unity. But for the most part, everyone should be using MonoDevelop. Alright, so then just as before, we've got our basically our template that Unity creates for our script with the imports for the libraries. We've got our class, we've got our start method, and our update method. Okay, so I'm not going to go and cover this again. So the first thing, I guess the way that we can best cover how to go over these is to just go ahead and do it, right? So let's see here. Let's start with, let's create a variable, and let's call this variable actually, let's create a Boolean variable, and Boolean variables can be either true or false. Okay, so we're going to call this, just call it decision. And we're going to set this equal to true. Alright. So then in our start method, since this runs the first time that our game object is initialized, we're going to create an if statement. And the way that you do that is you start with the word if, and then an open parenthesis. And then we're going to say if decision, which is our variable, equals true, then we do a close parenthesis and an open curly bracket, and then I like to go ahead and close that if statement so that with a the closing curly bracket, and then anything in here, okay, within these two curly brackets, if this variable is actually equal to true, then whatever is in here is executed by the script. Okay, so you may be wondering why we have a double equal sign. So in C#, the way that you compare values of variables, right? So let's say decision is a Boolean. The two values that we could compare the variable decision to are going to be true or false, or also 1 and 0, 1 being true, 0 being false. To evaluate that, we use a double equal sign. Okay, if we were to use a single equal sign, then we would be assigning this value to this variable as we have up here. Okay, So then the other thing that we can do is, instead of using a double equal sign to check to see if this equals that, we could also say this, okay? So we've got this exclamation and then an equal sign, meaning that if decision does not equal true, okay, that would indicate that decision actually equals false, right? Then execute this stuff. So there are other comparisons that we can do, but we can't. With a Boolean variable, we can only do equals or doesn't equal. All right. And then there's a shorthand of writing this. So we can say decision equals true. So does decision equal true? The other way would be to just write if decision. Oops. And that's wrong. So if decision, meaning that we're not checking if it's true, but just by writing this, it's actually evaluating to see if it's true. And then if you want to write to see if it's not true, so being false, you would write if not decision. Okay? So the exclamation and then the variable would be the same thing. So I bet you guys want to see this in action, right? So let's go ahead and do this. If decision equals true, then we want to send something out to our log, and we'll just say decision is true. All right, so let's save that, and let's go ahead and click play. And as you'll see here in our log, we have the output decision is true. So that means that this code executed because this variable actually equals true. All right. So now watch what happens when we change this value to false. So now decision equals false by default. The start method is going to execute. The if statement is going to check, does decision equal true? And since it doesn't, it shouldn't execute anything within the curly brackets. Okay. So let's go ahead and save that. Go back to Unity, press play. And there is no output, indicating that our condition is working as expected. All right. So we've got if, and then we also have another condition called else. And what we do with that is say this isn't true, but we want something to happen if it isn't. So we would just write else after the closing curly bracket, and then open that curly bracket, and then close that curly bracket in the else statement, and then we would write debug.log decision is false. And now to actually make this true, we're going to change this value back to true. Okay. So then decision equals true. Start's going to execute. It's going to check, does decision equal true? Then the debug log output is going to equal true. If decision does not equal true, then it's going to check this else statement, okay? So if decision equals anything other than true, then this is going to execute, all right? So first, let's check and make sure that we get this decision is true output. All right, so we have decision is true. Let's go back to monodevelop. Let's change our value of decision to false. Go back to Unity. Press play. And now our output indicates decision is false. So we know that our if and else statements are both running the way they should. So for this next part, we should probably create another variable. And this one, let's make it an integer. And let's call this some number. Really being original here with my variable names. So some number, and we're going to set it equal to 5. So let's go ahead and create a new if statement. And we are going to check to see if some number is equal to 5. Then we're going to output a log saying that some number is 5. Okay, so here's the other part of what you can do with an if statement. And so it's not just if and else, but it's also else if. Okay, so if you want to check to see if that variable could potentially equal something else, you could do something like else if. Okay, so basically you're writing another if statement, but it's part of the original. So you do the open parenthesis again. So then you can do some number. And let's do greater than 5. And we close that. So then we do debug.log. Some number is more than 5. And just like we can check with greater than, we can also do another else if, and we can do some number is less than 5. We do debug.log. Some number is less than 5. Okay. So, and then we can do an else at the very end. Okay. We can say debug.log. Some number is not less than 5, is not more than 5, and is not equal to 5. Now, in this case, we were never going to reach that last else statement. Why? Because 5, right, is what some number is equal to. Even if we set some number equal to 1, it's going to basically end with this else if statement saying that some number is less than 5. If we set some number to 6, then it's going to be in this else if statement basically stating that some number is more than 5. And if we just set it to 5, it'll say some number is 5. So this statement here is completely useless. We're never going to get there. The only time we would do something like that is if we wanted to ensure that kind of like a, all right, so if our value equals something that we want it to be, then we want to execute some kind of code. If it equals something other than what we want it to be, but still within a specific parameter, then we want to execute some kind of code. Again, if we want to execute our code based on some number and some specific parameter, we want it to execute another line of code. But then there are cases where you want to execute a line of code where our value, our variable doesn't equal our value, and it's not within our defined parameters, but we still want to make sure that something happens in case we haven't accounted for everything. And this, my friends, is where, this is where bugs come in. This is where debugging happens. This is where you try and figure out why something isn't working the way it is. So that kind of like that last else statement is kind of like a catch-all that happens if none of these conditions are true. In our case, one of these conditions will be true. So, because even if we don't assign anything to this integer variable, then the default value for this integer is going to be 0. Okay. This is not to say that it would happen with something else. Like, for instance, if we created a game object, okay, and we didn't assign anything to it, that game object's value would be null. Okay. So we would want something there to say if it's null, then do this. So that's different. But with integers, booleans, I think booleans are false or true by default. I don't know. We'll have to check that. Integers are 0 by default. Strings are just empty by default. So mostly everything is initialized except for classes when you're creating like game objects or other things like that. So let's go ahead and play with this and see if all of these statements except for the last one can happen. So let's click play. And all we get to here is decision is false. Well, that's interesting. It's because we didn't save our script. And let's click play again. Alright, so some number is 5. Let's set that equal to 7. Some number is more than 5. Set that equal to 3. And some number is less than 5. All right. So you can also, with if statements, you don't have to check just one value at a time. Okay. You can do. Let's get rid of this. You can use and or to combine checking for values. So like, for instance, here, let's just get rid of this, all of it. All right. So we've got our two variables. We've got decision and some number. So what if we wanted to check to see if decision and some number equal a specific value and only execute code based on that specific value? All right. So we would do something like this. So if, open parenthesis, we do decision equals true, and okay, and the operator for and is to do the and sign twice. Okay, and some number equals 3. Then we want to execute code. Okay, debug log. Decision is true, and some number is 3. Right, and we could do then else if, or you know what, let's just do else. Debug log. Decision is false or some number doesn't equal 3. Okay, and by using and, okay, we're basically saying that this and this both have to be equal. So like decision has to be true and some number has to be 3. If decision is false and some number equals 3, then this isn't going to be true and the else statement's going to run. Right? So right now we've got decision is false and we've got some number is 3. So let's go ahead and save this. Click play. Alright, decision is false or some number doesn't equal 3. So let's go ahead and change this to true. Decision is true and some number is 3. Okay, so just like we have in our logic here, it's saying that if both of these are true, then run this. Otherwise, we don't want to run this. Okay, or sorry, otherwise we want to run this statement because one of these isn't equal. All right, so there's another operator that we can use here, and that one is called or. Okay, and that's just 2 pipes. All right, so we do the 2 pipes, and that means or. So basically, we're saying if decision is true or some number equals 3, then we do this. Otherwise, we do this. All right, so let's go ahead and set decision to false. All right, let's change our statement so that it makes more sense. Either decision is true or some number is equal to 3. All right, and then here, neither decision is true or some number doesn't equal 3. So what'll happen is this will only run if decision is false and some number doesn't equal 3. This will run if decision is true or some number equals 3, right? So right now we've got decision is false and we've got some number equal to 3. So we should be in here, okay? So let's save that, click play. Either decision is true or some number is equal to 3, okay? Perfect. So now let's change the 3 to a 4. Neither decision is true or some number doesn't equal 3, okay? So because they're both evaluated and both false, then we're basically in here in the else statement, all right? So there are a couple of other ways to evaluate. So we could do, instead of some number equals, or see, I keep saying equals because I see 2 equal sign, but really it's some number equal to 3. We could do is less than or equal to 3, meaning that if some number is equal to 3 or 2 or 1 or 0 or any of the negative numbers, then this is still going to return true. If some number is greater than or equal to 3, meaning that 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and so on, or if some number is greater than 3, meaning 4, 5, and 6, etc., less than 3, meaning 2, 1, 0, and negatives, we could also do not equal to 3, meaning every other number in the world besides 3. So there are tons of operators that you can use to compare strings and numbers and booleans, and I mean, this is basically what it comes down to when you're programming. When you're doing anything, logically, it's usually if conditions that determine what you're going to do next in your program. If it's going to be this or that based on some value that you're evaluating. Okay, so I'm going to stop it here. I think that this is probably long enough for basics of C# and if, else, and else if statements. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like the video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. We're almost at 300. Again, it's a small number, but we're climbing steadily, but continuously here. We're not we haven't slowed down really, but we haven't sped up either. So I appreciate all you guys do. I appreciate that you guys continue to watch my videos and that you are liking them, and it makes me very happy that I'm able to contribute to the community and that you guys are getting something out of it. All right, so enjoy your weekend, everybody. I will see you next week.